UFOs in the US Navy. I turned 73 years old today, and I am on my last legs. Before I leave this world completely, I want to share my story. Well, it is more my father's story than my own. He joined the Navy as an ensign in 1959 and was a restricted line officer with an engineering background. He worked specifically in weapon testing and development. He spent most of his years in the Navy deployed to San Clemente Island off the west coast. He was deployed there in April of 1961 when he got his promotion to lieutenant junior grade. From my understanding, it was unusual for someone to be deployed to the same location for decades, but he was part of a specialist team that eventually became known as the Core 12. There was only 9 people on the team, so I am not sure where the name came from. He worked on reverse engineering non-human craft that had been collected mostly from South America. The program started mid-1963 when President John F. Kennedy was pushing for alternative weapons platforms after run-ins with the Russians the year before. The Core 12 eventually comprised of 6 Americans, 2 non-human entities, and a professor from the UK that worked together from 1963 to 1979. I met the professor and the 2 of the other American servicemen. I will call them American 1 and American 2, and a couple of their kids who were around my age. We did not get to see much of Dad as he was based on the island, and his security clearance and procedures to leave the island became burdensome, especially after Nixon took office in 1969. Pretty much, from 1969 to 1979, we would only see Dad twice a year, Christmas time, and around June/July when they would take a break. Before that, we would go to the island for Christmas. They did not have family barracks there, but as a lot of personnel went home for the Christmas break, they always found us a place to bunk down for the night. Dad took this photo, Christmas, 1966, between Christmas and New Year's Day. I can't remember the exact date. I am on the right. I was 16 at the time. One of the sons of American 2 is on the left on the beach, and American 1 and American 2, and American 2's other son are on a blow-up raft in the sea on the right. We had seen a craft moving at speed on the horizon. It would plunge into the water. No noticeable splash, which we thought was weird. Then a few seconds later, come out of the water, then repeat the plunge, every time, getting closer and closer. We thought we lost it when it went in the water and did not resurface. Then, we could see a mini wave heading towards the shore. The guys jumped on the blow-up raft to see if they could get closer. Dad asked me to grab his camera. I am not sure of the make, but it was a white plastic one with a black eyepiece. After about 3 to 4 minutes, this popped out of the water. It hovered for about a minute in the exact same spot. We were all freaking out, but it was like we were frozen in place. I remember I wanted to run, but my legs would not move. I shouted for my dad, but could not turn towards him. Then the craft shot straight up into the air, and in less than 2 or 3 seconds, we could not see it. I came to find out that this was first contact for the 2 members of the non-human Core 12. This is similar to the Anon who said the aliens have a base in the ocean. Not spinning, despite being in motion. Water dripping straight down. No wake. Looks AI. It did not spin, and there was no wake when it entered the water or left the water. There was a slight, what I can only call a force, like a pressure wave when it came out of the water, which pushed the water aside and was felt by the guys on the raft and us on the beach. But when it was floating still in the air, we felt nothing except very small vibrations from the hum it made. I want to say we did not hear a sound. We felt it at a very low level, in your bones rather than on the skin. As it came out of the water ran down what looked like a bubble around the craft that you only knew was there because of the little amount of water running down it. As soon as it hovered, the bubble collapsed and the water ran down the craft. Bro, that's AI made. Well, I am not sure what AI existed in 1966, but Dad had this photo, negative, since then, and I got it when he passed away in 2006. I scanned the negative about a year later when HP came out with a scanner that could scan negatives. The negative at the time was not great, nor was the tech, but the photo is 100% real. Those alien entities tricked our Black Project guys into collaboration while slowly imposing a state of slavery over the human race. Once our so-called experts realized what happened, they were forced into submission as we became completely powerless over them. That is the real reason UFOs and all that shit is classified. The ongoing disclosure is an effort by negative ETs to establish a one-world government via manufacturing of an economic collapse and provision of a solution, digital currency, which will seal the nail in the coffin for humanity's freedom, unless you people grow some balls and start speaking out. It doesn't have to be big. Just take small domain over your life and go from there. Free yourself wherever you can. The location that this happened was referred to as the UFO Cove from that point forward by the personnel in the know, but as it was hushed up after being reported by Dad and the other two enlisted personnel, a team was sent there to monitor what was eventually officially named Pyramid Cove because of all the weirdness happening there. Dad was one of the team. Nothing happened for a week straight, except for lights at night over the sea on the horizon. The teams were getting bored of staying in a tent and wanted to get back to base. At the time, he was working on a project that was using lasers as rangefinders and target designators. He got the idea to use them to see if he could communicate with the craft. That is how they finally made contact. He attempted to send a message in Morse code to the other personnel. It was all a bit of a joke, as no one believed him or the other two guys that saw the UFO. He had not developed the photo, or let anyone know he had it at the time, as he did not want it to be taken off of him. He came to find out that non-human entities did not understand the Morse code message he was sending them. They were just curious to see what the lasers were about. The first night, the same craft in the photo buzzed them, flying over the tent and hovering for a few minutes. It seemed to be inspecting them and the laser, but the rest of the team shut up after that, and Dad became a bit of a legend amongst the Navy personnel. After multiple witnesses and cameras had now caught the craft, all hell broke loose. An entire section was sent to the Cove to set up a temporary base and monitor the situation. Dad was put in charge of trying to communicate with the craft given his success from the night before. On the second night the craft returned, but this time kept at more of a distance. It seemed to be spooked by the amount of people and equipment now present at the camp. The third and fourth night, there was no interaction, and they thought they had scared them away. This is the story of how my friends and I decided to each make a pact with a demon and the resulting consequences / synchronicities. It's a bit slow to start, as it requires a bit of background, so bear with me. This happened about 4 to 5 years ago. I'm fairly confident in my memory of the events, but some parts are hazy, which I will explain why later on. By the way, I refuse to greentext because reasons. So anyways, I'm at my friend's house. I'm hanging out with 3 of my friends and 2 other people that I knew, but didn't really associate with. They are good people, but having more than 3 friends is exhausting, and I honestly don't care enough to maintain that many relationships. I say this because I kind of disregard their existence during this event. To avoid confusion, my friends will henceforth be known as Hatchet, Colt, and Paul because reasons. A little background on each of them and what our circle have been doing recently is necessary for the story. Paul was a born and bred Christian. At this time, he was fervent in his belief, but had started to waver upon us becoming friends. Though it's quite possible it started beforehand, I only really noticed it after this event. He is by no means close-minded. He was our group's straight man. At this point, we had been friends for about 6 months. He had been friends with Colt and Hatchet for much longer. Colt was agnostic and the embodiment of the pothead stereotype. He was our funny man. I've known him for most of my life. Hatchet was an atheist and deeply opinionated. He was also a bit of an edgelord. He was the raver of the group and the guy with all of the connections for psychedelics. At this point in time, the four of us had been experimenting with psychedelics heavily at Colt's house on a weekly basis. Our favorite thing to do was to try and scare ourselves into tripping harder. We all believed that Colt's house was haunted long before we started experimenting with psychedelics for various reasons. We also believed the focal point of this haunting was his garage, where we always hung out. The night prior to the event I'm going to be talking about, eventually, Hatchet had brought a Ouija board just for shits and giggles. Long story short, nothing really happened. We experienced the usual things that led us to believe that the house was haunted, but nothing more happened. So, we ended up carving the first letter of each of our names out of the board, pouring wax onto it, burning it in various places, carving a message into the back of it, then leaving it on some random person's doorstep a few streets down. Basically, we were a group of stupid assholes. So, with that out of the way, the next day/night, we decided that we were all going to trip on mescaline again, hence why my memory is hazy at parts, and try to incite some sort of paranormal event. We took it early in the afternoon, so we would peak throughout the night. As the night wore on, and we passed midnight, we were running out of things to do, and our usual games were losing their punch. So, I, having recently read The Lesser Key of Solomon, and having it on hand in PDF form, suggested that we try something new. I suggested to my friends that they suspend their disbelief and we try performing a ritual that we sell our souls. We had tried so many different things and had absolutely nothing to show for it besides some unexplainable noises and spooky phenomenon. I explained to them that thinking of this as the cartoonized version of magic was wrong, that it is possible that performing these rituals, instead of summoning a stereotypical horn and winged demon and getting our heart's desire, was actually a way to hone our senses and our minds to contact something ancient and powerful. Not necessarily demons or gods, but something beyond human understanding, especially with our perception of the veil between our realm and the next being made permeable by the mescaline. Hatchet joined me in convincing the others, saying that we had nothing to lose. Most of us didn't even believe that the soul existed, that if this didn't work, it was just another win for atheism. If it did work, we had everything to gain. Paul almost immediately said no, as expected. Hatchet was in. The second I suggested selling our souls, Colt took a little convincing, hence the above paragraph. I was satisfied, as I believe in the power of phrase. So, we set about browsing the web and researching what exactly our rituals would consist of, figuring out who we each wanted to contact, determining what exactly we wanted, and gathering what we would need to perform said rituals. We each ended up cobbling together a mix of different rituals from a wealth of different sources. As it was rather difficult to stay focused on mescaline, I don't exactly remember what Colt and Hatchet chose, except that Hatchet wanted to summon the demon that starred in The Exorcist. Apparently, he found legit information regarding the demon from the movie. Bonus points because the location of The Exorcist was just a short drive away. Colt's choice also involved something to do with lust and being desirable. I chose payment and said knowledge. It took roughly about 2 hours to do research and gather what we needed. We tried to rush because we wanted to begin at 3 AM sharp. I don't really remember the specifics of the different rituals we performed, except for the fact that they all involved an invocation, some blood, some fire, and meditation. I do remember that none of our rituals were exactly kosher. They did not adhere to any sort of standard set out in a grimoire. Rather, they were a combination of many. As I said before, we kind of cobbled them together in a rush. I personally did not think the specifics mattered much, as long as they had a few basic elements. Everyone treated me as an expert on the subject, even though I was relatively new to that side of the occult myself, so my affirmation was enough to go off of, while those being invocation, blood, candles, incense, and burning a written invocation with blood on it. so we turned the lights off in the garage and then set about performing our rituals separately and simultaneously, while Paul and the two others watched in a mixture of awe and horror. By this time, I had already forgotten that the other two existed. One of them actually ended up leaving once they realized we were serious. She did not believe in ghosts, but she believed in demons and was super Christian. I never understood that logic, so don't ask me. Side note, she was also my girlfriend at the time. Our relationship ended at that moment. She did not say another word to me until years later. I forgot that she was one of the people there, until now. She wasn't important then, or to the story now though. The other girl ended up staying for the duration of the ritual. Her and Paul had a thing, I think, I'm not sure. Also unimportant to the story. So, we finished our ritual simultaneously by cutting ourselves, applying it to the invocation, and burning it. We stupidly did this with the garage door closed, much to everyone's dissatisfaction. Once we completed the ritual, we simultaneously began meditating. I fully expected to have intense hallucinations by this point. I had none. I saw nothing but darkness, which is to be expected when you close your eyes and meditate, except for the whole tripping on mescaline bit. The longer I meditated, the more drained I felt, both physically and mentally. I stated my intentions to that darkness. I offered free vassals in exchange for knowledge and understanding of everything, and I expressed that I desired something that I can't explain in words. It was a feeling that I imparted to the darkness. It was vague, but at the time, I felt that if souls did exist, 3 of them had to be worth at least a world's worth of knowledge. I didn't want just what I could read in books or learn on my own. I wanted everything. I waited for a long time for some sort of answer or sign, even some sort of hallucination. Nothing came. There was only that darkness, so after an indeterminate amount of time, I opened my eyes. We all did, simultaneously. I did not think much of it at the time, but that was the beginning of many weird and unexplainable things to come in the following days. Both Colt and Hatchet both said they had the same experience as me, the same darkness, the same exhaustion. Paul was relieved by the fact that he had not been eviscerated by a demon, though this experience made him seriously start questioning his faith. I think it was partly because he wasn't eviscerated by a demon. We were all a bit unsatisfied with the results and extremely exhausted. Despite being only about halfway through a mescaline trip, I was ready to go to sleep and felt like I had already come down, so we all decided that was it for the night and decided to head to our respective homes. I hitched a ride with Paul and the girl that stayed, back to my house. I only lived a mile down the road, so I typically walked to and from Colt's house, and I was too exhausted to make the trek back to my house in the dark on a back road. I remember Paul and the girl talking to me about what had happened, but I don't remember any of what was said. I do remember that the girl did not know how to keep her mouth shut and told everyone she knew what we did. Colt's house subsequently became known as the Hell House, and people tended to shy away from me after that. Thanks to social media and living in a small town/rural area, people became aware of who we were, despite my best efforts to keep to myself and not associate with the majority of the people in that area. So anyways, I got back to my house and immediately something was off. There was a bright pale blue light that was on in a room of my house that had no lights in it at a time when no one at my house would have been awake. The only lights on in my house were the lights that are built into the outlets to illuminate the floor at night, and those are only in the hallways. I immediately thought it was a flashlight and that someone had gone into my house, so I asked Paul to come with me as he was big into boxing, and I figured that was better than going it alone. The most experience I have with combat is a single year of Taekwondo. Read, none. I was already exhausted, and all of my guns were inside. We both started approaching my front door by walking through the front yard. We moved as quietly as possible, yet the second my foot touched the first step on my front porch, the light turned off. Our gaze was immediately drawn to the front door, which was located next to the room that was lit up as a shadow passed across it. My front door has a large pane of glass in it, through which you can see the tiny pale light of one of the hall outlets. Paul immediately noped the fuck out. I had no choice but to suck it up and head inside, as it looked like someone was walking around my house and my family was asleep upstairs. Needless to say, upon searching my house, no one was there that shouldn't have been there, and my family was all asleep. Later that day, after getting my 8 hours and enjoying my usual lucid flying dreams, I decided I was going to walk back to Colt's. I spent a lot of time at his house. There wasn't exactly much to do in the area, unless you like bowling. So I set out. It was always an enjoyable walk. There was lots of scenery on the way, as the road cut through forest and some old-ass farmland. The road was also dotted with about a handful of abandoned homes, all of which were at least a century old, some of which stretched all the way back to the plantation days, so it was always a beautiful stroll with lots to say. About midway, instead of looking at all of the beautiful scenery, I was looking at the ground as I walked on the side of the road. Almost immediately, I found 2 $20 bills neatly folded and held down by a piece of gravel, which alone would not have been that big of a deal. I found cash before, though never that much. So I decided I was going to hit up Dude Man and get some weed, hash, and LSD. I figured it was not a waste of money since I found it, so why not? Later on, as I met with Dude Man, he ended up accidentally giving me double of what I asked for because he was drunk. When I tried to hit him up to tell him what happened, his phone was disconnected, even though I had just gotten a hold of him an hour beforehand. Needless to say, the circle conveyed and enjoyed the fruits of my eternal damnation. The trip itself was incredibly enriching and was one of the best experiences of my life. It completely changed my current outlook on life and led to a long chain of events spanning a couple of years. I was granted knowledge and understanding almost immediately. I believe I have only continued to grow and learn from my relationship with Paimon since then, though it's nothing I can concretely tie to the ritual like this. My friends were not so lucky. Within a week of the ritual, Hatchet would earn his namesake. He ended up getting into an altercation over some weed at my neighbor's house with the owner of the house. We will call him Carl. Carl was trying to screw Hatchet over. Hatchet pulled a knife and started getting big with Carl. Carl initially backed off and went inside. Before Hatchet could leave, Carl ripped open his front door, screaming Hatchet's name with a butcher knife in hand. When Hatchet turned around, Carl threw the butcher knife at Hatchet from across the yard. Somehow, this butcher knife spun perfectly and cracked Hatchet in the side of his head. It split his face open from his cheekbone below his left eye to the top of his left ear, completely severing the muscles and tendons. Hatchet nearly bled out right there, though he managed to survive. Somehow, according to his doctor, if he would not have ducked when he did, the butcher knife would have hit his throat and he would have died on the spot. Now, Carl is by no means some professional knife thrower or anything of the sort. He had never thrown a knife with any success before, as long as I'd known him, let alone a damn butcher knife, sideways. Outside of one sticking around with some throwing knives I own, he did not practice either. It was just a lucky throw. Hatchet has continued to have rather bad luck following this event. I don't want to delve into his personal business, so I will not go into detail. As for Colt, within that month, his father passed away from what was basically a paper cut. The police and medics that arrived on the scene said it seemed that due to the combination of medications he was on, blood thinners, pain meds, etc., he failed to notice that he was bleeding profusely and ended up dozing off from the loss of blood. He bled out in his sleep. As for Paul, he eventually succumbed to peer pressure and performed the ritual himself in the garage at Colt's house as Colt and myself watched. Hatchet had drifted away from our circle, and I thought that it was best to have 3 people that had performed the ritual within our circle. At this time, Paul had completely turned his back on Christianity and took what he was doing very seriously, and carefully decided on what he wanted and who he would invoke. I think that because he took it seriously and respected what he was doing, he did not experience what Hatchet and Colt did, though he kind of treated it like a child and their birthday wish. He did not tell us what he wanted or who he invoked. Paul has had relatively good luck to this day, though there is no obvious synchronicity that I am aware of. related to his ritual, besides him saying that he experienced the same darkness and exhaustion, though that could easily be chalked up to bias from us expressing our experiences. Since all that happened, I walked away from psychedelics and weed about a year or so after the ritual. I was diagnosed with cancer at the young age of 22. I went to the doctors for chest pains and came out with testicular cancer. That was actually one of the best things that happened to me though. Not only did the cancer kill itself before it had a chance to spread elsewhere by cutting off its own blood supply, which is pretty unheard of, that event completely changed my life for the better. I can't tie that directly to the ritual. It just seems pretty damn miraculous to me. In the late 1890s, near the Chetco River in southern Oregon, a dozen loggers and their families encountered a great beast with disastrous results. Camping in tents by the river, the lumbermen would awaken each morning to find their freshly cut timber, which required 3 men to move, carelessly scattered about like matchsticks. Huge human footprints left in the damp earth were the only clues. Since they had been having trouble with bears, the men followed the footprints through the torn shrubbery and uprooted saplings until they disappeared. That night, the loggers were awakened by shrill screams of something not quite human in the near underbrush. Seizing a rifle, one man lit a torch and headed into the darkness. He was quickly followed by several other men. In a very short time, the first man rushed back to collapse in terror at the feet of his tracking companions. He babbled incoherently about a hairy monster 8 feet tall with yellow eyes, fangs, and hands like a man. His description put the camp in an uproar. The next night, 2 men decided to track and kill the hairy intruder. They carried a small lantern and loaded rifles and disappeared into the darkness behind the tents. Back in camp, their friends heard screams and shrieks and the sounds of gunfire. Then, silence. When the 2 men did not reappear, the other loggers grabbed lanterns and torches and, while firing their guns into the air, set out in search of their comrades. A half-mile from camp, they found the scene of a desperate struggle. Broken and bleeding, arms and legs ripped from the torsos, their 2 friends lay scattered all over the place. They had been slammed against trees and torn into pieces by something with incredible strength. Blood dripped into small pools from branches high in the trees, as well as from the crushed greenery of the surrounding shrubs. But of the hairy creature responsible, there were only bloody footprints leading deep into the woods. The loggers struck camp and left the area the next day. Professional hunters entered the forest in the days that followed, but found no sign of the creature.